Right now, the United States, China, and the European Union are quietly fighting over a frozen island most people forget exists. Greenland holds resources worth trillions of dollars, and the race to control them has already begun. By the end of this video, you'll never see Greenland the same way again. You've been told Greenland is just ice. You've seen it massive on maps, distorted by the Mercator projection, looking like it could swallow continents. But here's what nobody mentions. Beneath that ice sheet, beneath 2.2 million cubic kilometers of frozen water, lies something that could reshape global power forever. And the melting has already started. Most people think of Greenland as Denmark's quiet Arctic territory. Population 56,000. More polar bears than people, right? Wrong. That mental image is about 20 years out of date. Because while you weren't paying attention, climate change did something nobody predicted. It didn't just melt ice. It unlocked a treasure chest. Greenland sits on deposits of rare earth elements that make your smartphone work. It has enough uranium to power cities for centuries. There's gold, zinc, lead, and iron ore in quantities that make mining executives salivate. But here's the part that keeps geopolitical analysts awake at night. And in a moment, you'll see why this matters more than any oil field in the Middle East. Rare earth elements. You've probably never heard of neodymium, praseodymium, or dysprosium, but you use them every single day. They're in your phone screen, your laptop, the motors in electric cars, wind turbines, military jets, guided missiles, and basically every piece of modern technology that separates us from the Stone Age. And right now, China controls 90% of global production. Let that sink in. 90%. The entire Western world, all of NATO, every Silicon Valley tech giant, they all depend on China's goodwill to keep functioning. It's the greatest geopolitical leverage since OPEC cornered oil in the 1970s. One trade dispute, one diplomatic crisis, and suddenly the production lines stop. Tesla can't build cars. Apple can't make iPhones. The Pentagon can't manufacture fighter jets. This is where Greenland changes everything. Geologists estimate the island holds substantial rare earth deposits, potentially rivaling China's reserves. The Kvanefjeld deposit alone could produce enough rare earths to supply 13% of global demand. For decades, this didn't matter because the cost of mining in Arctic conditions was insane. Permafrost, extreme cold, ice sheets thick enough to bury skyscrapers, and infrastructure that didn't exist. But then something shifted. As global temperatures rose, Greenland's ice began retreating at accelerating rates. Mining seasons extended, access improved, and suddenly, the economics started making sense. What was impossible 30 years ago became difficult 20 years ago. Today, it's merely expensive. Tomorrow, it might be profitable enough to trigger a new Cold War. Here's where it gets darker. In 2019, reports emerged that President Trump wanted to buy Greenland from Denmark. The Danish Prime Minister called the idea absurd. The media laughed, but intelligence analysts didn't laugh. They understood what Trump's advisors had figured out. Whoever controls Greenland's resources controls the future of technology, energy, and military power. The Chinese understood this too. By 2016, Chinese companies had already invested heavily in Greenland's mining sector. They tried to buy an abandoned naval base. They offered to build airports. Denmark and the United States blocked most of these moves, recognizing the strategic threat. This isn't about mining rights anymore. This is about whether the West can break China's monopoly on the materials that power modern civilization. But wait, because the resources story gets even more complex, and this is the part most documentaries skip entirely: uranium. Greenland has it, lots of it. The Kvanefjeld deposit contains one of the world's largest uranium reserves outside Kazakhstan and Australia. Uranium powers nuclear reactors, which many countries now see as essential for carbon-free energy. As Europe pivots away from Russian gas and coal, nuclear suddenly looks attractive again. Greenland could become a major uranium supplier, which means it stops being just an Arctic territory and becomes a critical energy security asset. Then there's oil and gas. Despite the irony of melting ice revealing fossil fuels, Greenland's coastal waters likely contain billions of barrels of oil and trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. Companies from ExxonMobil to Shell have explored these waters, though results remain mixed, and drilling in Arctic conditions presents massive challenges. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even as the world talks about renewable energy, petroleum still runs everything. And if Greenland's estimates are accurate, it could rival some Middle Eastern producers in potential output. Add gold, zinc, copper, and iron ore, and you're looking at an island that transforms from frozen wasteland to resource superpower within a generation. Mining companies have already started projects at sites like Citronen Fjord for zinc and lead, and at Nalunak for gold. These aren't fantasies. These are active operations adapting to Arctic conditions. So why isn't Greenland already the richest place on Earth? This is where reality gets messy. First, the environmental cost. Mining in the Arctic doesn't just mean cold weather challenges, it means operating in one of the planet's most fragile ecosystems. A single oil spill in these waters could devastate marine life for decades. Rare earth extraction produces radioactive waste. The Kvanefjeld project faced massive opposition precisely because mining rare earths there would also extract uranium and thorium, creating a radioactive tailings problem nobody wants in their backyard. Greenland's government actually banned uranium mining for years specifically because of these concerns, though they recently lifted the ban under economic pressure. Second, infrastructure. Greenland has basically none. There are no roads connecting towns, no railways, limited port facilities. The capital, Nuuk, has 50,000 people and feels like a small town anywhere else. To extract resources at industrial scale, you need to build everything from scratch in an environment that destroys equipment, where construction seasons last months, and where every supply ship costs a fortune. Some estimates suggest that developing full mining infrastructure could cost tens of billions of dollars before a single resource gets exported. Third, the political situation is bizarrely complicated, and this might be the wildest part of the whole story. Greenland is technically part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but it has home rule. It controls most domestic affairs, but Denmark handles defense and foreign policy. The population is roughly 88% Inuit, with deep cultural ties to sustainable living and environmental protection. Many Greenlanders oppose large-scale mining because it conflicts with traditional ways of life, fishing and hunting, that have sustained communities for thousands of years. But here's the catch. Greenland receives approximately $550 million annually in subsidies from Denmark. That's about half the government budget. Most Greenlanders want full independence from Denmark, which is entirely reasonable. But independence means replacing that subsidy money, and the only realistic way to do that is mining. So Greenland faces an impossible choice: preserve the environment and remain dependent on Denmark, or industrialize rapidly, risk ecological catastrophe, and gain sovereignty. It's a decision that would tear apart any society. Local elections increasingly focus on this single issue, with pro-mining parties narrowly winning against environmental coalitions. The margin is razor-thin. The future remains completely uncertain. Meanwhile, global powers aren't waiting for Greenland to decide. They're positioning themselves. The United States reopened its consulate in Nuuk in 2020, the first time it had diplomatic presence there since the Cold War. It wasn't subtle. The message was clear. We're watching. We're investing. We care about Arctic security. The U.S. already operates Thule Air Base in northern Greenland, a critical early warning radar station for missile defense. Losing influence in Greenland would be a strategic disaster for American military planning. China continues pushing soft power. Despite setbacks, Chinese companies keep trying to invest in Greenland's infrastructure and mining. They offer better terms than Western competitors, don't attach political conditions, and have experience building megaprojects in hostile environments. For a territory desperate for development capital, Chinese money looks attractive, which terrifies NATO strategists. The European Union designated Greenland a priority for raw material sourcing, recognizing that dependence on China threatens European industrial capacity. Brussels now offers development funds and technical assistance, trying to lock in resource agreements before others do. Even Russia, despite being focused on its own Arctic territories, watches nervously as Greenland's strategic value skyrockets. And then there's the shipping route nobody talks about enough, but should be the headline. As Arctic ice melts, the Northwest Passage through Canada's Arctic archipelago and the Northeast Passage along Russia's northern coast become viable shipping routes. These routes cut transit times between Asia and Europe by roughly 40% compared to the Suez Canal. Ships save fuel, time, and money. The economic implications are staggering, and Greenland sits right at the junction point where these routes converge. Control Greenland, and you control who uses these passages. Charge transit fees, and you generate billions in revenue. Establish ports and refueling stations, and you become indispensable to global trade. This isn't science fiction. Shipping companies are already testing Arctic routes. Within 20 years, these passages could handle significant commercial traffic. Greenland stops being a frozen outpost and becomes a maritime crossroads. Here's what makes this entire situation genuinely terrifying. Climate change is the catalyst for all of it. The faster the ice melts, the more accessible the resources become, the more strategic Greenland grows, and the more pressure builds for rapid industrialization, which means more emissions, more warming, more melting, in an accelerating feedback loop. The very crisis making Greenland valuable also guarantees that the scramble for its resources will make that crisis worse. We're watching a geopolitical transformation happen in real time. A place that was literally ice and irrelevant for all of human history suddenly becomes the most contested territory on the planet within a single human lifetime. And most people have no idea it's happening. So what happens next? 3 scenarios seem possible. Scenario 1. Greenland achieves independence, carefully manages resource extraction with strong environmental protections, and uses mining revenue to build a prosperous, sustainable society. Think Norway's oil wealth model, but in the Arctic. This is the optimistic version. It requires incredible political discipline, resistance to corruption, and enough international cooperation to prevent exploitation. Possible, but difficult. Scenario 2. The mining boom happens too fast. Environmental regulations get watered down under economic pressure. International corporations and foreign governments essentially colonize Greenland economically, if not politically. Local communities suffer displacement, pollution, and cultural disruption while profits flow overseas. Independence happens, but it's hollow. This is the cynical version, and history suggests it's more likely than anyone wants to admit. Scenario 3. The geopolitical tensions escalate into actual conflict, not necessarily military, but economic warfare, sanctions, sabotage, proxy political interference. Greenland becomes a battleground for great power competition, unable to control its own fate as larger forces fight over its resources. This is the nightmare scenario, but given current US-China relations and the strategic importance of rare earths, it's not implausible. Reality will probably land somewhere between these extremes, messy and complicated like everything involving money, power, and climate change. But one thing is absolutely certain. Greenland will never be irrelevant again. The ice that protected it for millennia is disappearing. The resources that were locked away are now accessible, and the world has noticed. Whether that attention brings prosperity or exploitation, sovereignty or subjugation, depends entirely on decisions being made right now by people most of us will never hear about. If you found this deep dive into the hidden geopolitics of Greenland valuable, consider subscribing. This channel explores the maps, resources, and power struggles that actually shape our world. The stories hiding in plain sight that explain why nations do what they do. So here's a question for the comments. Do you think Greenland should prioritize environmental protection or economic development? Is there actually a way to do both? Or is that just wishful thinking? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want to learn more about Arctic geopolitics and the resources that will define the 21st century, check out the link in the description for additional research and sources. The next few decades will determine whether Greenland's hidden resources become a blessing or a curse. And you just learned something 99% of people don't know.